everyone. So my name is Brooke Harshberger, and I just wanted to say welcome to this course CCI is doing on shooting stars, and that's ministering to children and families who are on the autism spectrum and who have other special needs. I'm super excited to be going through this today with you guys. I desperately wish we could actually be in a classroom together, and this isn't just me talking to my camera for you guys to listen to later on, but that's okay. Hopefully we'll meet another time at another CCI event or something like that. But anyway, super excited to be teaching this to you guys today. This subject is something that's really, really near and dear to my heart and something that I really love. And yeah, so before we get started, I just wanted to say that, and I wanted to say I'd love if you wanted to connect with me on social media, or if you had any questions about the course, or if you had anything else that you wanted to talk to me about, or if you just wanted another kids worker friend here in Ireland, I would love to be that for you. I'm embarrassingly easy to find, so you can just look up my name, Brooke Harshberger, on all forms of social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can find me there. Give me an ad or a follow. I'd love to talk to you. And then if you had any questions about this course, or you wanted any more information or anything like that, feel free to shoot me an email. Anyway, yeah, I'm super excited to be doing this with you guys today, and so let's get started. So the main idea for what I want to talk about today with shooting stars is that having children with Down syndrome, autism, sensory disorders, or other needs in your kids' ministry is not only going to enhance your church experience, it'll actually make you more like Jesus and your church more like heaven. Creating an inclusive church where we can celebrate differences of people of all different varieties actually makes a stronger church. So the question is, for today, the big overarching question that I want to start off and ask is, how are we making room for everyone to really belong? How are we making room for everyone to really belong? And that's what this next hour is really going to be all about. So we don't ever want to segregate or separate. We always want to try to be inclusive in church, right? That's something that we all know. But how can we do that in the kids' room, in the kids' church portion of church, in a way that the whole classroom is still engaged in the healthiest possible way? I believe we can do this by, firstly, knowing what God's heart is for His church, and that's going to be the first thing we're going to talk about. Preparing your leaders and preparing your team. That's something else we're going to talk about. Having sensory spaces or having just physical spaces that don't hinder people who have special needs. And lastly, by supporting the family as a whole, not just the child, but the whole family. When I was doing my research for teaching this class, I learned a new statistic that I hadn't heard before, and that is that 80% of families, of parents of children with special needs, end up getting divorced. 80%. That's almost... That's the vast majority of families with kids with special needs. And I just don't want that for our church. I don't want that for Christians. I don't want that for anybody, but I don't want that especially for people in our church, our churches here in CCI, in Ireland, and globally. I don't think that that's what God wants. And I think we can really help that by supporting the family. So I'm speaking to you today as a follower of Jesus, as a social worker, as a kids worker, as a kids pastor, as a church planner, but mostly I'm here as a learner. And I've done kids ministry for many years, not too many years, but a few years. And I've worked with kids and parents of all kinds of levels of abilities and strengths and weaknesses and all things across the board. But so some of this that I'm going to talk about is from my personal experience, but some of this is also, most of this is from other kids pastors and other kids workers and other churches that I contacted and asked them what worked for them, because what works for some people is not going to work for all people, and what works for some kids is not going to work for other kids. And as you guys know, if you've ever worked with a family of a child with special needs, some things works with that kid, but then another kid comes in with the same type of diagnosis and you need to do something completely different. So, yeah, so one of the main things to take away from this course today is just to approach all of this with the eyes of a learner and know that this is something that we're going to need to keep reworking, we're going to need to keep creating, we're going to need to keep asking questions about. And I certainly don't have the answers. I have a few things that have worked for me and some of my kids, but that doesn't mean they're going to work for you. And we need to do the extra work to continue learning and to continue asking questions. So let's get started. So I'm going to start right out in scripture and just talk about a little bit what I think Scripture says about this. So we're going to start out in John chapter 9, starting off in verse 1. And it says this. So John 9, verse 1 through 3, talking about Jesus. And it says, "As he passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' Jesus answered, 'It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him.'" I thought this was really applicable just because it says it right there in the scripture that God chose from birth to make this man different. That it was God's choice. It wasn't at fault of his parents or anything like that. He was made like that from the womb. And we know from other areas in scripture that in the womb we were fearfully and wonderfully made there, that he crafted us with the palm of his hand. He was not cursed in any way whatsoever. God crafted him and chose to make him blind. And we also see from this verse that people born with things that make them different or maybe make their lives more difficult than people who weren't born with those things are born, not just so that their lives are difficult, but it literally says in verse 3, they exist so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And I don't know about you, but I want to be a part of church that regularly sees the works of God. And the only way to do that, there's many ways to do that, but we see here that by one of the ways to do that is by having people in our church that are different and having people in our church that do have disabilities, whether that's your vision or that's something else. Because this man had this issue of blindness, the works of God were able to be displayed in him. Next thing I want to read is from Exodus chapter 4. And this is God calling Moses when he first calls Moses to lead the Israelites. So if you want to go to Exodus 4, we'll start at verse 10. "But Moses pleaded, 'O Lord, I'm just not a good speaker. I never have been, and I'm not now, even after you have spoken to me, for I have a speech impediment.' 'Who makes mouths?' Jehovah asked him. 'Isn't it I, the Lord? Who makes a man so that he can speak or not speak, see or not see, hear or not hear? Now go ahead and do as I tell you, for I will help you speak well, and I will tell you what to say.' But Moses said, 'Lord, please send someone else.' Then the Lord became angry." So I've read this verse about 1,000,000 times, or heard it in a sermon about 1,000,000 times, but I've never read it in this context. And one thing I think is really interesting that I got from this is that not only are people with special needs called just to be a part of the church, but God also calls them to lead. Moses is pretty adamant here about his speech impediment and how he doesn't believe he can be a good leader because he doesn't know how to communicate. And God doesn't let him use that excuse for anything. He says, "I've called you to lead. This is what I've called you to do, and this is what you're going to do." So not only are people with special needs called to just be a part of the church and be included, but they're actually called to lead. I love that when Moses continues to protest that he isn't good enough to serve God in the way that God asked him, that it actually made God angry. When we limit what God wants to do, or we say, "Oh, I don't know about that person. I don't know if they can lead," or that person might make me uncomfortable with their speech impediment or whatever it is. Obviously, we wouldn't actually say that, but our actions and our thoughts and our feelings might communicate that. That actually makes God angry. Not only is that not his will, but that makes God angry. And again, I don't know about you guys, but I don't want anything that I do in leadership in my church or in my life to make God angry in any way. And of course, we know Moses moves on from this and he does lead. And because he steps into this role of leadership, he's one of the most iconic characters in the Old Testament. And because of him, we have this tremendous example of the Israelites and their relationship with God and the bride and the relationship to God and the church. And without Moses leading, we're missing, think about that. How much scripture would we miss if Moses didn't step up and lead? The last verse I want to highlight and read to you guys is from 1 Corinthians chapter 12. So it says this: "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, 'Because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body,' that would not make it any less part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. And I really like this part here. It says, the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem weaker are indispensable, and on those parts of the body that we think are less honorable, we bestow the greater honor, and our unpresentable parts are treated with greater modesty, which our more presentable parts do not require. But God has so composed the body, giving greater honor to the part that lacked it, that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, they all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. I want to be a part of church. I want to be a part of a church where they believe that every member of the body is indispensable. I want to be a part of a church that believes that from the baby toe to the liver to the brain to the ear to the bicep to every single part in the body believes that there's value and there's purpose in each and every individual unique part. Not only that, but they serve a unique purpose. I believe that that's the church, the kind of church that God's called us to be a part of as a movement in CCI. I know that's the church that God has called me to be a part of. And I'm excited to see what this looks like for you, what this looks like for me, and for the church, the global church as a whole. So now we're going to move on to more of the nitty-gritty of what we're going to talk about and more of the tips and things like that. So before we get into specific tips and things like that, I just wanted to go over some of the three main types of disabilities that you have encountered or you will encounter in your church. So there's I've divided them up into kind of three main categories. And the first one is this, physical disabilities. So an example of this would be muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, some version of paralysis, vision loss, hearing loss, a walking impairment, things like that. So for the purpose of this talk, we're not going to talk about this a whole lot, but I did think it was worth mentioning because it is still important. And I just wanted to say with this, there's nothing like arriving to a new place as a child or as an adult and realizing that there's going to be barriers from preventing you from being in that place and engaging. So especially as a new person. So think back to maybe to your first time you went into a brand new place, whether that was a new church, a new job, a new family member's house, or a new friend's house, something like that. So think back to that first time that you were going somewhere brand new and think about how you felt. Then think about, now that you have that in your mind, then think about how you might be feeling or might feel if you were going through that same experience, but let's say you broke your leg and you were on crutches. Or let's say you had eye surgery that day so you couldn't see. There's many subtle ways that churches are not safe places for people who have issues walking or have issues seeing or have issues hearing and things like that. And I think we need to be aware of those things. I know with our church, for a long time, still currently, we meet on the first floor, the first level of a building. So no matter what, to get to where church happens, you either have to walk up a flight of stairs or you have to go up the lift. And what if you arrive at that church and you know that there's a flight of stairs that you have to get to, and you know that you are going to have issues with the stairs, and you're new, and maybe you're by yourself, and maybe you're a little bit anxious. What if there's nobody at the door to help you? What if there's nobody at the door who knows how to use the lift and get you up the lift? That would make me really nervous, and that would make other people really nervous. Or if you're a mom of a kid with like muscular dystrophy or something like that, and you're worried that taking your kid to a brand new place, they won't have games that your kid will be able to play. These are all things that I think are important to think through and think about. Obviously, there's things that we can't prevent, like I can't just magically make a first or a ground floor appear in our building. It's just the way the building is. That's the building that we're renting, and it's an old building. There's not much I can do about that, but I can be aware that other people might be struggling with with mobility or things like that, and I can have greeters at the door who know how to use the lift and are friendly and welcoming and can help them with that. And I know I can also prepare games. Maybe I don't prepare them every single week, but I have them up my sleeve or in the back of my mind. I can prepare games for kids' church that I know kids won't have to use their hands maybe, or won't have to use their legs for a running game, or maybe even games that they don't have to use their mouth but can do other things. And yeah, that's just another way that we can prepare for that. The next area of ability and disability that we're going to talk about today is developmental disabilities. So that some of those disabilities would be Down syndrome, autism spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy, though that falls into the previous category as well, fetal alcohol syndrome, and things like that. So this is probably the one that we're going to interact with the most as kids workers, if not the next one. So I think this one's really important to talk about, though this one might be the easiest to cope with and manage, but that depends totally on your situation and where you are and the child and things like that. So to talk about developmental disabilities, I'm going to share a time where I really messed up in this area. And it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but I think it was a really important learning experience for me, and I hope that other people hear this story and can learn from it. So one example of a time where I really dropped the ball is when we were our first year as a church plant. We were doing our big first Christmas outreach, and we were doing like a walk-through nativity in our building. So kids would queue up from the outside of the building, up the stairs, and into our kids' room, and then the nativity would go around the building. And in each room, like in one room, we had like baby cows. In one room we had baby goats, and Mary and Joseph were in a room and things like that. So you walked through the nativity and got to hear the whole experience. And then at the end there was Santa and sweets and all those sorts of things. So anyway, we were doing this outreach, one of our first big impressions on the community as a church plant. Really, really important event. And we had a single mom and her son with very severe autism come to our outreach. I don't know if she just got pulled in off the street or if she planned to come or what happened, but they walked in the front door. And the stairs were super crowded with people, just super crowded. So the person who was on the front door and on the welcome team that day noticed that the child had different needs and might have needed some support. So he offered to the mom, hey, we have this lift right here. Would you like to go in the lift? That'll bring you right to the front of the queue. That way you don't have to wait into this noisy stairway. You can just go be in the next group that goes right into the nativity room, and you can just start right away. And you don't have to be in this loud. There was like lights flashing and everybody was handing out sweets and everyone was talking and elves were singing and lots was happening. So the person at the front door asked them if they wanted to do this. And the mom was like, yes, thank you so much. That'll be great. So the welcome person just said, 1 minute, I'm going to go get the key for the lift and I'll be right back. And I had prepped all the leaders and I really messed the ball up on this. I was proud of my leader for asking the mom if this is what she wanted. But then, so long story really short, he went and got the key for the lift, came back down, got them in the lift, which was pretty small, but had never been trained on actually how to use the lift. So most lifts, you just push the button and you go up, and you push the button or you go down or whatever. But this lift, you need to stick the key in and hold it in a certain way and continue to hold it until it reached whatever spot it was. So anyway, he didn't know how to use the lift. Long story short, the child and the mom and this leader got stuck in the lift. The kid was stuck in a really small confined space for a few minutes because the lift got stuck. And then when the lift got stuck, a light is flashing in the top, like the emergency light is flashing, and a bit of, not a super loud, but like an alarm is going off. So a child with severe sensory issues is trapped in a small box with a stranger and his mom with a light going off and a loud sound going off. And because there were so many people in the building, I was at the top of the stairs and I didn't even see the light going off for a few minutes. So I couldn't even help them get out right away. So needless to say, we should have trained our people working the front door how to use the lift. And if we would have done that, we might have had, that kid might have heard about Jesus that day. And because we didn't do that, I know I'm putting a little bit of pressure on myself with that, but because we didn't do that, that mom, the moment they got out of the lift, they bolted out, and I haven't seen them since. So, so it's really important to prepare your leaders, and it's really important to prepare yourself for working with kids with developmental disorders from all sorts of areas and ways. And I definitely learned my lesson with that one. And I share that so that you don't have to learn your lesson the hard way. You can just learn it from hearing that testimony. But God is good, and we're still reaching out to the community and all that. So I know that child and that mom's story isn't over. So I know it'll all be good in the light of eternity. But that's something really easily that we could have done. We could have taught, everybody on the front door that day how to use the lift in 2 minutes, and we just didn't for whatever reason. So yeah, so that's an example of a developmental disorder. And the last example of abilities and disabilities that we're going to talk about today is emotional and behavioral. So this is everything ranging from mental illness, attachment disorders, attention deficit disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and then families also with pretty much any type of social work involvement also might fall into this category. So this one's particularly difficult because these disorders or these disabilities are often seen as the hidden ones. They're more difficult to identify because the behaviors are sometimes similar to other disorders, but the reason behind the behaviors is often very, very different. So then in how you treat the problem, it's different. Also, lots of kids, lots of guys with severe emotional issues or severe behavioral issues are often dual diagnosis. So they'll have this main issue with behavior issues or an emotional diagnosis or whatever it is, but then on top of it, they'll have something else, and that just makes it a little bit more complicated. So when a problem comes up with these guys, it's not always easy to know which way to help them because we don't always know the cause of the problem. All right, so we're now going to go into our practical tips section. So to start this one off, we're going to talk about just some practical things that you can do for ministering to children who have autism or other sensory issues. So the main idea here is just that whatever parent you would ask for who's a parent of a child with special needs, particularly one with autism, they're going to tell you that their main wishes for their kid are just for their kid to have a life where they're accepted, where they're loved, and where they're going to have friends and in a community as much as possible, just like any other kid. But the thing for us that we need to consider with this is how can we include a person in our church and in our kids ministry who might change that dynamic or might change or limit how kids of other abilities or other disorders are trying to hear from God. First practical tip for this section here is your registration form. So one thing that's been super helpful with me that we implemented a few months into our kids ministry, our newest kids ministry, our newest church plant that we were a part of, is just on the registration form. So when you have a new kid arrive, whether that's digitally or on a piece of paper, whoever brought the kid has to fill out a form that lets you legally keep the kid for whatever the amount of time that church is. So normally on that form you would have their parent's name, the kid's age, what school they go to, those sorts of things. But I also add a little line that says something like, is there an ability or disability that you would like to let the kids worker know about that can help your child have a better experience in church today? And then I leave like an area where they can write like, autism or attachment disorder or whatever it is. Sometimes parents will come up and just tell you or it'll just be really obvious. Some disabilities are more obvious than others. But some parents will tell you hey, just so you know, my kid has Down syndrome. So they might be a little bit extra excited when you do the song time. Just so you know, just tell them to sit down or tell them to do whatever, and they're used to following directions, and don't let them, rule the roost, tell them what to do. But some parents don't say anything at all. So I just found that to be really important for me. That way I'm talking to the parents anyway when they're filling out the form normally, because we're normally standing at the desk together. But that way when they're filling out the form, if I see them pause as they're reading it, I can ask them specifically if there's anything that they want me to know about or anything like that. Also, while I'm saying that, I'll just say also, just use extreme kindness and discretion when you're talking to a new parent about any of this. We never want to assume that a child has a disability, ever. Even if their behavior is so obvious and so stereotypical, oh, this looks like this. We never want to assume anything. We don't know where they are in their diagnosis. Maybe their kid does have it, but they haven't been diagnosed, or we don't know anything. if it's a new person. We just don't know. So I never use the term, or I never would use any type of diagnosis words unless a parent uses them first. So yeah, we just don't ever want to offend or assume. So by putting that little box or that little line on the check-in sheet or on the registration form, that just takes away any potential awkwardness and helps you be prepared for who might be coming into your classroom that day. So tip number 2 is very specific for kids with autism, as we're talking about, and that is having a break space in your classroom. So lots of different educators and pastors and things will have all sorts of different names for this. I call this the break space. And what this is just that often kids with sensory issues, they'll want to be touching you, they'll want to be in your space, they'll want to be feeling your clothes maybe, they'll want to be touching their clothes, they'll want to be sitting on your knee, they'll want to be this close to you when you're trying to teach, or they just have that tactile, hands-on, skin-to-skin thing that they need, or they have the opposite thing. They don't want to be touched. They're very particular about touch, and they're very particular about their, senses. But so having this break space can be really helpful for kids who might struggle with sensory issues like that. So what our break space looks like is in the back of our room. Our room is very narrow, very long and narrow, so it's the back of the room, but it's not very actually far away from the group. I just have a pile of pillows and a pile of blankets, like a pile of cushions, like sofa cushions and things, that are just a pile on the floor. And if I can see a kid is getting too much sensory overload, or maybe it's too loud, or maybe they're having a hard time calming down, and I know it's one of my autism guys, either myself or one of my leaders will redirect them and say, hey, why don't you come sit with me over here in the break space? Or why don't you come sit with me over here on the cushions? And that way they can take the cushion, they can squeeze it, they can feel it, they can touch the soft blanket, they can do whatever they need in that little break space to sort of calm their bodies down on a sensory level, but they can also still fully engage with what's happening because they're only a few feet behind the group. Some churches go all out with this. I've seen churches that have entire sensory rooms or entire break space rooms. That wasn't feasible for our church just because we're a church plant. We are not that big. Some churches do that, and that is amazing. Do with what you can do. But one thing that was just helpful for us is just having that little bit of a break space so that child can calm down in the back of the room in terms of their senses. A lot of times kids like that, kids with autism, will also have those sound headphones, so it just dulls all the sound if it gets too loud. So a lot of times the kid will go back there and they'll put those headphones on and everything kind of just calms down for them. But having that break space in the room has been a lifesaver for some of our autistic guys, and most of the time they're only there for a few minutes. They're there for a few minutes. Normally it's a transition from one activity to another activity, and they just need to calm down a little bit, and then they normally have no other problems the rest of the time. So having the break space was tip number 2. Tip number 3, you guys are probably doing this already, but this is large group time, small group time, and individual time. So this is really helpful for children on the spectrum, mainly because some children on the spectrum might learn better in a large group, some might learn better in a small group, and some might learn the best totally one-on-one. Again, this just has to do with how they receive information, and could come down even just to a medication issue if they might not have taken medication that day or whatever it is. Some children with autism their senses might be overloaded when they're in a giant group of people. So if it's the opening of the class and you have 20 kids in the room and everyone's singing and dancing and it's fun, but it might be like overload for them. If they know that each Sunday there's going to be large group time, small group time, individual time every week, and they know that's expected, then they know that every time they come to church, if they're overwhelmed in this one part, that very soon there's going to be another part so that they can make it to that next part. And your leaders know that too. So if they see a kid getting overwhelmed with how much stimulus is going on in the room, they can say, hey, in a few minutes, we're going to move into small group time and you're going to be able to sit with just me while we do our craft together. Things like that. So you're probably doing that already, but it's important to recognize for children with autism that the different sizes of groups and having individual time can be really helpful for their learning. Next tip for working with guys with autism and other sensory issues is visual schedules. So if you've ever worked with in a professional education setting, then you probably know all about this. Or if you have someone in your family with a child, most likely in your family with autism, you probably know about this. So a visual schedule is basically just something that a child with autism can see with their eyes that communicates with them what's expected of them. So for example, I can think of some guys with autism I know that have a visual schedule for their morning routine. So they'll wake up in the morning, their visual schedule's on their wall in their room, and there's 2 columns. So there's a to-do column and there's a done column. And in the to-do column, there's different icons or different pictures of different things they need to do. And as they do them, they take them and they move them to the done column. So let's say for a morning routine, they have a picture of a bed. So they wake up and they're like, okay, I need to make my bed. So they make their bed, they take the bed icon or the bed picture and they move it to the done column. Then they look on their chart and they say, okay, what's next? What's next on my visual schedule? And it's a smile and a toothbrush. Okay, I need to brush my teeth. So they go brush their teeth, they come back to their schedule and they move it to the next thing. And then they can see how they're, making progress on their thing and they're reaching the end of their list. And it just makes it really a lot more manageable for them and a lot easier for them to understand. So, and cope with if they're getting too stressed out. So if they walk into a new place and they're like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. But then they see like, oh, it's just these little steps. I can do those little steps. So I'm not saying we need to do that with everything for all of our autistic guys. We're not a school, we're a children's ministry. And if they need that support, up to your discretion. If they need that much support with visual schedules and you think you can do it, then go for it. But there's a much simpler way that we can do this than actually making those, fancy laminated schedules. And that's by just starting off the day, every day, with running through what we're doing. So if we start Kids Church and we welcome everyone and we do our opening, worship song or whatever it is, and then after that we bring everybody down and we say, okay guys, this is what we're going to do today. We're going to start off with our Bible verse, then we're going to go to craft time, and then we're going to go to game time or whatever it is. And you walk the kids through each thing that's going to happen that day. The kids with autism will say, okay, I know what's expected of me. I know what's going to happen, and I can prepare for that. What also is helpful, if you have, a PowerPoint or if you have a screen or even if you have like a chalkboard or something like that, if you can write down, the order of things that are happening that day and what's happening, if you have a lot of guys with autism, they can constantly be referring to that board and see where they are on the day. That also helps them self-regulate if they're getting overwhelmed. With a particular activity, a leader or themselves can refer them to the board and say, hey, we have just a few minutes left on this activity, then we get to have snack time, then we get to have break time. Or, you're missing your mom or whatever it is, we just have a few minutes left on this and then mom's going to be here to pick you up. Yeah, the point of the visual schedules is just when an autistic child is at ease themselves, then they can easily be in whatever environment they're in. They can easily learn, they can easily make friends, they can easily participate in what's happening when they're at ease themselves. And that just makes it easier for everybody. And by them knowing what's happening and what's going on, that just is really helpful to them. All right, so the next one, we're going to go on to practical tips for ministering to children who have Down syndrome and who have other developmental disorders. So some of these are going to overlap a little bit, but most of them are different depending on what group you're talking about. But the main idea for this one is that I want to talk about is that everyone with a learning disorder is going to be different than the next person. So even within a diagnosis. So if you think of anybody who might have Down syndrome, or if you've heard of anyone with Down syndrome, you know that just because someone has a Down syndrome diagnosis, their cognitive ability could be really high, but their speech could be really, really low. So they could be highly intelligent, with a college degree, but they might have a really difficult time verbally communicating. And the flip side as well, I know I have some autistic guys who are phenomenal with their speech and talk with no disability practically whatsoever, but their cognitive ability is really low. So how they take in information and all that is really, really slow. I know P6, who has just learned how to write their name, but they can speak and talk to me like any other P5 that there is. So there's various levels of people with developmental disorders. And just because they're different and there's different levels, that doesn't mean that they can't learn alongside their peers. So tip number one, with guys who are with Down syndrome and other developmental disorders, is that peer help will help them. Friend-to-friend help will help them. It'll help other students, and it will help you. So often the best way that kids learn is through their peers, and it's the same thing with guys with Down syndrome. Guys with Down syndrome and other developmental disorders will learn how to act and learn how to do things and, learn scripture and things like that by watching how other kids learn and how other kids are receiving the information. It'll also help when you pair up a guy with a developmental disorder or Down syndrome with another kid. That kid will also learn because they'll learn from that kid, and then they'll also learn just about serving and loving people that are different from them. So it's a win-win on both sides. So when a student with a learning disability has a buddy or somebody in their group to help them, the whole group can work better together. I think this is also better than pairing them with an adult, because pairing them with an adult, it's harder for them to observe because the adult is often so much older than them or is so much different from them. But when a kid sees another kid their age, they can learn by how the other kid is learning. And I just think that that's really, really helpful. Tip number two with this group of kids is to be really quick on how you handle problems. So one of the moms that I interviewed when I was gathering information for this said that one of her, the things she struggled with the most with her church when she first started going to her church is that some of the leaders were actually afraid to approach her about some questions they had about her kid and needing to help her kid because they didn't want to bother her because they felt bad, which I totally get and totally understand as a kids worker. Like, you think about those parents and you don't want to give them any more stress than what they already have from the school and other areas that they're involved in. But most parents, if their child's having an issue, they want to help their child with that issue, especially if it comes to learning something or being a part of a group. So if you have a child who's having a really hard time sitting and listening to the kids' sermon every single week, and no matter what you do, you can't get them to just to learn from this one part of the service, and it's distracting other kids, and every week it's a struggle, like no matter what you try, bring it up with the parent. If you can't solve it on your own, bring it up with them. 99% of the time, the parent is gonna want to help you find a solution to help their child because they want their child to learn about Jesus, probably more than you want their child to learn about Jesus most of the time. So I kind of talked about this a little bit just now, but tip number 3 for this group is going the extra mile with kindness with parents. So this applies obviously for all 3 different areas where I'm talking about tips, but this one is especially important. So like I said, we just want to be extra, extra kind and extra, extra loving with these parents specifically, because the majority of these parents, when they interact with their kids' teachers, they're interacting with their kids' teachers most of the time because there's a problem or because there's a benchmark that they need to be working on. They're not often interacting with their teachers on terms of, success or things like that. Even if you think about a kid at a regular developmental level and not with a disability, if everything's going well with the kid, you're not normally talking very much to the teacher. But most of the time when you're talking to the teacher, it's because there's already an issue happening or there's a problem with their kid. So that's my third tip for this area is just go the extra mile with kindness. Be genuine with the parents. Like, don't just make up compliments for their kid. Like, if you see their kid doing something great, remember that, stick that in the back of your mind. That way, when you see the parent next, you're like, hey, let me tell you about this amazing thing that your son did. Like, they will love that. Absolutely love it. All parents will love that, but especially, parents of kids with special needs, like, just go the extra mile with kindness. Just go over the top. Regularly highlight their kids' strengths, regularly compliment them and how they're parenting them. Whatever you can find, just go over the top. And as I said, if you're doing this regularly, when you do encounter a problem, if you do encounter a problem with their kid, they're going to want to help you all the more because they know that you already genuinely love their kid and you genuinely support their family. All right, so next we're going to talk about some practical tips for ministering to children with emotional or behavioral needs, which, like I said earlier, this might be one of the hardest ones. In the survey that I sent out to kids pastors all over Europe and all over America, this is the group that almost everybody agreed was the most difficult to work with. Personally, I think that this is because these sorts of disorders and these sorts of needs can't be helped with routine or with medication all the time, or with practical helps. These sorts of issues don't stem from like a chemical imbalance or a chromosome missing or whatever it is. These issues stem from a parenting issue or a lack of love or a lack of attachment in the home, or because, the child's in foster care or something else. So so I just think this one can just be a little bit more complicated, even if the problem is presented the same way than that it is in another disorder. It might be presented in the same way, but the root of the issue is different. So how you treat that issue might be different, and often is very different. So also, and as I said before, children in this category, with emotional and behavioral needs are often dual diagnosis. So let's say the kid has, attachment disorder because, they're in foster care or whatever it is. A lot of guys in foster care, a lot of guys with attachment disorders also have ADD or ADHD. So when they're acting out, are they acting out because they're bored and they didn't take their, ADHD medication that day? Or do they just need a hug? And if they just need a hug because of whatever emotional issue they might have, if you give them a hug, is that going to solve the problem? Or if you hold their hand, is that going to solve the problem? Or is this a problem with their ADHD, and you holding their hand or offering them a hug, is that going to trigger them even more and get them even more, it just gets, dual diagnosis can just get complicated. So so the main idea for this one is just to love these kids extra. And we'll talk about that with the last tip. But tip number 1 for ministering to children with emotional or behavioral needs is the adult buddy system. So in the last group, I talked about a peer or a friend buddy. This time, I'm talking about an adult buddy, and they're different because one has to do with learning and being involved, but this one has to do a lot more with love and with attachment. So in my personal experience, and this is going to be different for all churches and all backgrounds, but in my personal experience in social work and then as a kids pastor, this adult buddy system is something that's worked really well. So if you know a child is coming and they have an emotional or behavioral need, have your assistant leader or whoever is not leading the main teaching that day, or if you're switching off and on, just whoever's not the person at the front of the room, have them almost be like a one-on-one for that kid. It doesn't have to be as intentional and as outright as it is in school, but have that other leader sit next to them. Have that other leader, walk them over to the game, or have that leader, just be with them throughout the day. That way, if they have an outburst or if they need help or if they need, whatever they need, they're not going straight to the person who's directing the room all the time. They'll be going to the adult that is just closer in proximity to them. So that helps the child because they're not, involving the rest of the room in whatever problem is going on. That helps the leader because the leader is then able to, still continue on with the rest of the class while this one kid might be having an issue. And it also builds relationships with, multiple caring adults. There's probably one person who's directing the kids ministry at your church. It very well might be you, but by giving other leaders this opportunity, you're putting more people who love Jesus and more people who are going to love that kid in their life, and that's just really good. So, all right, so tip number 2 is rules and boundaries. Rules and boundaries are so important with this group. So set very clear expectations with these sorts of kids and keep up with them. So what are the rules for your kids ministry? Do you have a set of rules for your kids ministry? Do you say them regularly? Are they on the wall somewhere? How do the kids know what is expected of them? Maybe you don't communicate them every single week, but maybe you communicate them every other week, or they're on the wall and you can refer to them. Whatever they are, you want to make sure your rules are clear, they're concise, they're short, they're quick. That way, whenever a kid, especially a kid with an emotional or behavioral issue, whenever they might be out of line for whatever reason, you can just refer back to that rule, those rules that everyone is expected to follow. And there's no confusion. They know what's expected of them. Also, if you interact with, if they're, displaying behavior that's inappropriate, no matter what that behavior is, confront it right at the start. If a kid's doing something that's inappropriate, no matter what it is, if it's foul language, if it's a gesture with their hands, whatever it is, the moment you see it, stare the kid in the eye, say, we do not do that in kids' church. That's hurtful because of whatever reason. Refer back to whatever your rules are and say, we do not do that here. That behavior is not acceptable. If it happens again, that behavior is not acceptable. If you do that behavior again, there will be a consequence. The firmer you are, the clearer you are on your expectations, the more they'll understand how to act. And if you aren't clear and if you aren't, direct, then they're just going to continue to push those buttons. And the more, sort of lackadaisical you are about those things, the more they're just going to take advantage of that. So be really, really clear on what's expected of those kids. That way, every single time they're in the room, they won't be pushing your buttons and they will have a better experience. Okay, so my last practical tip for working with kids with emotional disabilities and disorders is my most favorite one, and that is just love these kids and love them some more. So the biggest difference between this group and, the group of kids with autism and, physical disabilities and things like that is that the issues that these kids have, most of them will stem from an issue with a parent or an issue with lack of love at home or something like that. And these kids just, as every kid does, just really need the love of Jesus. And they need you in their life. And they need you speaking life into them. They need you believing in them. They need you loving them. And they might be the kids, that do your head in the most. They often are. They're, some of these guys are the ones that, curse in front of the other kids or give, some hand gestures that are not always the most encouraging and, often just like do your head in the most. But these guys, they just need your love. So next thing we're going to do is we're just going to do a little bit of a service walkthrough. So we're going to walk through what it's like for a person with a disability to come to your space, to be in a service, and then to leave. But before we do that, we're going to watch a really quick video that is just a testimony that I found on YouTube that I thought was really applicable to what we're talking about today. So we're going to watch this video. And after we watch this video, we're going to talk about it a little bit and then do this service walkthrough. So a couple things to look out for when we watch this video is this. So take notes and observe on how the child goes through the service. Watch and observe what the leaders do with the child and how they help the child get through the service. And then observe at the end, especially how the parents are affected by what the leaders are choosing to do and choosing not to do. So let's watch this video.
So I need you to take a deep breath, okay? Yeah. And then after church, we'll go home and you can do what you want to do. We're going to walk in and we're going to meet up with Miss Stamp, right? Okay?
Frankie is my oldest. He's 11 years old.
Okay? Be a good spot.
He is probably the most genuine person that I have ever met.
Are you going to help bring up the gifts today?
And then,
Right?
I'm Julie Waldron. I'm Frankie's mom.
speech.
You would like to give a speech?
Yeah.
For me, it was important that Frankie grow up with a faith.
Good morning, Frankie. How are you?
Good choice or a bad choice?
We'll talk about that inside, okay?
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, let's.
So we wanted to find a church that would welcome us
Did you have a good week at school?
and that Frankie could go to Sunday school.
What'd you talk about at school? Okay. Sometimes I greet him at the front door. Sometimes they will walk him all the way down to the classroom. Yeah. But what would a good choice be?
Something.
I am Denise Stamp. I am the Buddy Ministry Coordinator at Nativity, Church of Nativity. We are in the small group for the 5th graders. There's usually an activity for all the children, so he gets right into that activity with the other kids. Very good.
What are we going to make?
We're going to make a box. You're going to put some candy in it, a sweet treat, and then you're going to give it to somebody to show them that you care about them.
The Buddy Ministry is a ministry that has two purposes, and one purpose is to service kids with special needs, to help them integrate them into the programs that we have here for kids and for students.
There you go.
And the other purpose is to service families and parents that might need a break or really just want a place where they can worship while their kids are in that spiritual environment. I'm Lisa Scotta. I'm the coordinator of kids small groups and also the director of the Buddy Ministry here at Nativity.
Who are you going to give your box to? Yeah, I think I introduced myself to Lisa, and I said I happen to be a special educator in Baltimore County. And
Denise came to me and said, I'd love to help out with this child.
Ellen, can you get your name tag? So
The next year there were 3, and now we've grown to about 15 kids and 20 adults, teenagers and adult ministers that serve these kids.
Hi, Frankie.
Hi, Ellen.
How are you?
I'm good.
And
How are you?
good.
T-shirts for us distinguish who serves in children's ministry. It does help the child with special needs recognize who the buddies are and who the people that are going to help them are as well.
Turn it up again. Here we go.
Frankie is really motivated by music, so we joined the Time Travelers program where it's more of singing and dancing in the presentation of the message.
For us, the kids start out in big church, we call it, with their parents, and then there's a certain point in our service where they're pulled out for kids worship.
Jesus, could you please put on your crown?
Jesus, put on your crown.
All right.
And they hear the word of God in their own words. Sometimes they act it out.
And Frankie had the role of Jesus. What did you get to wear when you were up on stage?
Crown.
A crown.
It was gold.
It was gold. Good job. Yep, well, let's sit. Let's raise our hand if we want to turn. It can get overstimulating in Time Travelers, and they just might need a little visual cues.
We have a favorite.
We use the visuals in various ways. A lot of the kids just need those social reminders to be quiet, sit down. We have a pray card just to show hands together when we pray.
We love you so much. We pray this in your son Jesus'
When we get home,
name.
Okay? Come on.
can we have gifts?
We're going to bring the gifts. That's what we're doing. Well, first we bring the gifts, and then we're going to receive communion, okay? Going into church. So look, very
Quiet.
quiet. Okay. Good choices.
Has changed my life.
Good choices. Today, Frankie carried up a plate of the communion, and I don't know if you could hear it. He was very concerned that all 4 plates had the same amount of bread. That was the conversation he was then having with Father White on the altar, and Father White was lovely. He just went along with it and said, "Okay, thank you." Good job.
He may have a few words with the priest that were unexpected, but he did it, and he, felt comfortable, and he felt proud of himself.
You did an awesome job.
Yeah.
Were you cheering on Frankie?
Yeah.
He did an awesome job, didn't he?
The peace of the Lord be with you always.
And with your spirit.
So offer to each other a sign of peace.
Peace be with you.
Good job.
Yeah. Come on, let's go out.
I will be honest that sometimes on Sunday mornings I think, oh, can I just stay in bed? And then once I get in here and just see the joy with all of the children and dancing and singing and, the thank yous from the parents for just being able to sit through church, and it's the best hour of my week.
I think it's important for the church or the synagogue to get to know the entire family and what it is that the family's looking for.
It just is a willingness to serve and to help and to love. If a person has that, we can give you the tools you need.
He feels loved. He feels safe.
Hey, buddy! What'd you do?
You did a great job bringing up the gifts.
Can I have a hug?
Probably the greatest thing that Frankie's gotten out of this
Love you.
is a feeling of acceptance.
So obviously this church that we saw in that video is an absolutely massive church that probably has, endless resources and things like that. So I hope you didn't get distracted like that. I know my home church doesn't look like that church, and I think that that is great. I think that's totally fine. But the thing I wanted to highlight about that church didn't have anything to do with their resources or numbers, but is the heart behind what they're doing. The leader of their ministry said that they exist to serve children with disabilities and their families so that they can enjoy church and grow in their relationship with Jesus, both the child and the family. And I think that is just incredible. I think we should all be striving for that. So let's walk through a service really quick. We're just going to think through what a service might be for somebody with autism or, another type of disability or ability. And I think this is really important for us to do as kids pastors and as kids workers, just to do, or various areas of leadership, just to do, maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, just to see, what is our church communicating to the rest of the community? What vibes are we, what vibes, I don't like that word vibes, but, what are we showing to our community based on how we advertise, how our services are, things like that. So, as they also showed in the video, I love that they started the video from the car park. So from the perspective of a mom of a child with autism, she, from the moment before she even got in the car, I'm sure, she's having to prepare her son for what's about to happen in church. So she's already been working today in a way that it's not work because, she loves her son, but she's already, had that mental strain of, I have to prepare my son for getting ready and going to church. She wasn't talking to her other kids on making them emotionally prepared, but she was talking to her son with autism. So they're walking through the parking lot. She's having to redirect him and, speak to him. For some kids with autism, you saw the lobby was full of people, and that big level of volume on all those people is sometimes like a lot of stimulus for somebody with, autism or another sensory disorder. So one thing that I think was really cool is that leader was right at the door. She did say, she's like, I'm not always right at the door. Sometimes they bring him right back into kids' church, but that day she was right at the door. So the moment the parents walked in, the kid was in a space where he was loved and cared for, and the parents could go and just be a part of a church community, just as people. And I think that that's really great. For new parents, when a new parent walks in the space, is there clear signage as to where toilets are? Is there clear signage to where exits are or certain rooms are? When they walk into your space for the first time, are you showing them the kids' room? Are you saying, this is where we do worship, this is where we're going to do craft time, this is where we're going to do this? Are you walking the child through what's going to be happening their very first time at church or the parents' very first time at church? What are you doing to make sure that they know that they're comfortable and their child's going to be cared for? By doing this, that helps the child and the parent mentally and emotionally prepare for whatever's going to happen to that day, especially if they're new. If they're a brand new person, whether they're, on the spectrum or not, I think that this is a really good habit to get into, is just to be taking them into the kids' space and walking them through the service, and just really quickly, not, you don't have to give them all the details, but walking them through the main parts of the service. So next normally kids would go into like a worship time. Then maybe there might be game or something. So is there somebody in your classroom other than the person leading the classroom that can be there to support that person if they need support? Maybe you're transitioning then to a new activity, as a kid with autism or as a kid with, maybe an emotional disorder. Do they need a break at this point? Is that too much for them? And if you think too about a new kid, after all those activities right in a row, do they need a time for a break? Is there a break space in your kids' room? Or is there just, a place that they can sit away from everybody else where they can kind of just regroup before they're brought back into the group? Then, every Sunday you're probably going into like a prayer time or an encounter time or a seeking God time. That's different church to church, day to day, child to child. But, I haven't had a ton of issue with this time with any of my autistic guys. The only thing that comes to my mind is one of my autistic guys, always during prayer time when he wants to hear, when he's hearing from the Holy Spirit, he gets way less distracted and way more calmed down when he has that physical touch with somebody. So during prayer time, he always needed to be on the knee of a leader, or he needed to be in that, that comfy break space in the back of the room. That just helped him calm down enough that he was able to focus and pray, because if he was just out on the on the carpet all by himself, he was like all, sensory overload, just like all over the place. But if he had that space, that physical touch from a person, or if he was in that break space and he could just like put his head into a pillow or put his head into a blanket or the cushion or whatever it was, then he could fully calm down. So just some important things to think about, important things to think through your service. And then, post-service time, does the kid know how he's going to be picked up? Does the kid know when mom or dad is coming? Does the kid, is the kid going to bolt from the room? Do you need to walk the kid back to the parent? Like, how does that work for you? Just some really important things to think about. And then go through this again, as I said earlier, go through your service again, as a person who, might have difficulty walking or might have another disorder. Go through your service a few times and think, does my service, include everybody? Can everybody be comfortable? And can everybody hear from God in my service? As we come to a close, there's obviously a lot of information there, but there's just a few principles I want to highlight to you guys for you to take away with before this course is done. So firstly, as I said in the very, very start, we always want to be approaching this subject within our ministries, whether that's kids ministry or adult ministry or whatever it is. We always want to be approaching this type of ministry with a learner's mind. I know I have not arrived in any sense at all in working with my guys with autism or any of the other disabilities that we interact with, in our classroom. But we always want to be in the position of a learner. We always want to be, asking other kids pastors what they're up to. That's one of the great parts about being at CCI. That's one of the very few times throughout the year I actually get to have a conversation with a kids leader who's not at my church, and it is always so good. So make sure you go to those things and make sure you have the attitude and the perspective of always being a learner in this area. So secondly, in our closing here, second thing I want to talk about is just being proactive. So there might be some of you who are watching this and you're like, I don't have any kids in my church with autism. I find that unlikely, but there might be some of you. Or maybe there's some of you who are like, I don't have any kids in my church, who have emotional or behavioral disabilities. And if you don't, believe me, they're coming. And if they're not coming, maybe ask yourself, why aren't they coming? I'm not really going to go down that road, but maybe ask yourself, why aren't these sorts of people represented in our church? What are we doing? What are we communicating that these people aren't here? So anyway, just be proactive. If you don't have any of these kids in your children's ministry already, they're probably coming, and you want to be ready for it. Lastly, and this might be a little bit cheesy, whatever, but I really believe this in my heart, and I believe this for you as well as a kids leader, as a kids pastor. I believe that Jesus is really proud of you. I genuinely believe that Jesus really cares about this, and his heart is for his kids to know him. His heart is for kids of all abilities and disabilities to be his friend and to know him and to make him known. Yeah, so that's the end of my talk for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you got some practical tips. I hope you learned about what God's heart is for those with disabilities or other abilities. And make sure you check out at the bottom of your notes. There should be a section that's all just resources to further your learning. A lot of those are just YouTube videos that I found of testimonies. And some of those are books and articles and things like that. But all of them have really good information in them that helped me form some of the stuff for this talk and will probably help you professionally or in your kids' ministry as well. So make sure you look at those. And again, I'm very embarrassingly easy to find. So find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Brooke Harshberger is my name. Again, I'll spell my name out in the notes because I'm not going to spell it on here. It's ridiculously long. But and then send me an email too if you just want to, share comments or, criticism. No, just kidding. Whatever you want, send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. And I'd love to hopefully see you at the next CCI event. That would be great. So yeah, send me an email, brookeharshberger@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon.